Few methods of ending a battle are as exciting as a knockout, and a one-punch knockout is arguably the most rewarding kind of knockout. It's true that opinions on what exactly qualifies as a one-punch knockout vary. For the purposes of this video, though, we'll be examining finishes in which a fighter was eliminated by a single shot, even though a few other strikes were delivered after the fact. Without further ado, these are some of the most absurd one-punch knockouts in mixed martial arts history, listed in no particular order. Number 10. Anthony Pettis of Stephen Thompson. Kicking things off is one of the most unlikely knockouts on our list. If you know anything about Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, you'll know that he is without question one of the greatest strikers in UFC history. Now, to his credit, the same could also be said about his 2019 opponent, Anthony Pettis. But when they met inside the cage, it was pretty clear who the more seasoned striker was. Thompson was having his way with Pettis for the majority of the bout, using his pinpoint accuracy to control the pace of the fight. But then, out of nowhere, Showtime managed to produce one of the most iconic moments of his career, leaping forward with a well-timed Superman punch, catching Thompson right on the chin. Before anyone knew what had happened, Wonderboy was out cold, and Anthony Pettis had picked up a remarkable comeback victory, a massive win for his already great legacy. Number 9. Sean O'Malley vs Eddie Weinland. As one of the fastest-growing stars in MMA today, Sugar Sean O'Malley has earned a reputation as an exciting knockout artist. Of his 15 wins, 11 of those have come by either KO or TKO, giving him a 73% knockout rate. Of course, one of his most impressive finishes came in June of 2020 when he faced off against Eddie Weinland at UFC 250. During the opening minutes of round 1, O'Malley landed a beautiful straight right hand that caught his opponent on the chin. The shot immediately put Eddie Weinland to sleep and was named one of the best knockouts of the year. As far as spectacular finishes go, they don't come much better than this. Number 8. Rich Franklin vs Nate Quarry. On the long list of one-punch KOs that really stiffened their target, Rich Franklin's stunning knockout of Nate Quarry is easily one of the best. Franklin is definitely one of the most underrated fighters of his era, and during his title bout with Nate Quarry, it was clear that he had the technical advantage. Once he figured out his opponent's timing, he slid in with a picture-perfect left hook, landing right on his opponent's chin. And the way that Nate hit the floor just made this one all the more special. Rich Franklin was never really known for putting people to sleep, but this finish was truly a sight to behold. Number 7. Anthony Johnson of Glover Teixeira. Anthony Rumble Johnson is arguably the second hardest hitter in UFC history, right behind Francis Ngannou. Watching him go from an oversized welterweight to a powerhouse at light heavyweight was a pretty surreal experience. Sadly, Johnson never managed to win UFC gold, and persistent issues with making weight have somewhat detracted from his legacy. But in his best moments, he was an incredible fighter to watch, and no one had the misfortune of understanding that better than the future champion Glover Teixeira. During their UFC 202 matchup, the fight barely had a chance to get going before Rumble landed a massive uppercut that put Glover to sleep. 13 seconds was all it took, and at the time, many thought that this signified the end of Glover Teixeira's time at the top of the sport. Sure, he eventually proved the doubters wrong, but his loss to Johnson was definitely one for the highlight reels. Number 6. Cody Garbrandt vs Rafael Asunko. He might leave a lot to be desired in the fight IQ department, but on his best days, Cody Garbrandt has shown himself to be a killer in the cage. And few fighters have experienced that quite like Rafael Asunko, who took on Cody Garbrandt in June of 2020. Sure, he later proved himself to be just as wild as ever, but in this fight, Garbrandt looked extremely on point. And in the closing seconds of a dominant round 2, Cody landed a massive right hook that immediately put his opponent out cold. The exact time it landed is recorded at 4 minutes and 59 seconds, beating the bell by a fraction of a second. A fantastic return to form for a struggling fighter who still has the potential to produce exciting moments like this. Number 5. Kamaru Usman vs Georgie Masvidal. Kamaru Usman had his work cut out for him heading into UFC 261, wanting to convince the masses of his growing talents. And after beating Georgie Masvidal the first time around with a somewhat lackluster decision, Usman felt like he had something to prove heading into their second meeting. But with a full camp of preparation under his belt, Usman was ready to shock the world and show his improved striking. After an opening round that saw Garbrandt look pretty decent in some spots, Kamaru Usman turned up the heat in the second, landing a massive right hand that knocked Masvidal completely out cold. And sure, the Nigerian Nightmare may have connected with a few follow-up shots, but it was clear that Masvidal was out well before those landed. Number 4. Rashad Evans vs Chuck Liddell. By the time Chuck Liddell took on Rashad Evans in a title eliminator bout, it was obvious that the Iceman was not the same fighter he once was. especially when compared to his reign as champion. But when he faced off against the rising prospect in 2008, he suffered one of the most brutal knockout losses of his career. During the second round, Rashad Evans allowed Little to pressure him up against the cage, and when the Iceman attempted to catch him with an uppercut, he anticipated it, returning fire with an overhand right that sent Little crashing to the mat. This one wasn't easy to watch if you were a fan of this Octagon legend, but we still have to give Rashad his dues, and this was one mean-looking finish. Number 3. Dan Henderson v. Michael Bisping. A fierce rivalry can do a lot to a fighter's desire to achieve victory. And for Dan Henderson, listening to Michael Bisping's constant verbal jabs during an entire season of The Ultimate Fighter was enough to leave him determined to put a beating on the count. The two squared off at UFC 100, and this record-setting event proved to be the perfect stage for this one-hitter quitter. Or at least it would have been a one-hitter quitter if Hendo didn't decide to follow up his massive H-bomb with a flying forearm to Bisping's face. Of course, during the post-fight interview, Henderson admitted that the second shot was more for his own revenge than anything else. To date, it is one of the most famous knockouts in UFC history, and a testament to Henderson's incredible power. Number 2. Conor McGregor vs. Aldo. It's pretty hard to believe that we have two 13-second knockouts on one list, but just 8 UFC events before Rumble Johnson with flatlined Glover Teixeira, we played witness to perhaps the most shocking title victory in UFC history. Sure, Conor McGregor was given a pretty solid chance at dethroning the longtime featherweight King Jose Aldo, but to go out there and land a perfect counter in the opening seconds and against someone who hadn't lost in nearly a decade, that's quite a remarkable achievement. The punch landed at around the 10 or 11-second mark, and by the time the referee had realized what had happened, Conor McGregor had landed a few hammer fists for good measure. A star-making moment for someone who was already the biggest attraction in the sport. Number 1. Francis Ngannou's Alistair Overeem. And finally, we come to the one-punch knockout that stands at the top of this list. Francis Ngannou is probably the most powerful man walking the planet today, and though we were all aware of his potential during his early UFC run, it was his showdown against Overeem that really set the hype train in motion. Overeem was expected to serve as a fitting challenge, a veteran striker whose offensive skills would likely expose some chinks in Ngannou's armor. Of course, when the two squared off, the Reem had absolutely nothing for Ngannou, and after a wild exchange, Francis fired off the most perfect uppercut you'll ever see, sending Overeem to the ground before then following up with a huge shot from the top. This was the KO that put Ngannou's name on the map and made all of us question how anyone in the division could ever stand up to that type of power. Sure, Stade Miocic would find a way to work around that at UFC 220, but as Francis improved, that window of opportunity began to close at a rapid pace. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.